My name is Bec Dean. I am currently an independent curator. I've been working as a curator probably for almost 2 decades, but I started off my life as a practicing artist and maintained that career for quite a long time, while also writing about art and gradually sort of working my way into presenting the work of my peers. I am currently doing a PhD at the University of New South Wales, and my interests really lie in the intersections between the sciences and the humanities and in interdisciplinary artistic practice. I guess over the past 2 decades it's meant very different things, and I think for me curatorial practice is very contextualised, and it's very contingent on the place and the social context and the politics in which it operates. So I have been a gallery manager, but effectively been working as a curator. And often in my curatorial role, I've been doing the work of a producer or of an event manager or of someone that takes care of logistics in the space of an organisation. And that experience really comes from working for smaller organisations, so working for organisations that have between 5 to 10 people working in them. And so in those sorts of contexts, you kind of become a one-person department. And so you take care of a lot of things that are related to curatorial practice. But you know, on some occasions I will definitely call myself a producer rather than a curator. I think again, the whole, the definition of curator is a very contested one, and it's one that seems to expand as the years go by. So, you know, for instance, I get emails from eBay telling me that they've curated a selection of material items for me to purchase. And so if you looked at that at its basic level, you know, curating can be the bringing together of material culture for a particular audience. But it could also be a very rigorous kind of scholarly discipline that is connected to collections of Renaissance drawing or antiquities. And I think that idea of caring for a collection is built into the etymology of the word curator. So I think that it has many different meanings, and people apply those meanings, the word, to many different kinds of practices. So obviously there's a lot more kind of socially engaged art happening, and those sorts of practices take place in communities of audiences, and not necessarily in the space of a gallery or even an institution at all. And so the whole object relationship to curating is changed. On a really basic kind of fundamental sort of level, you want to come out of the experience that you both have together still holding respect for one another, and to have realised something that you're both proud of. If you don't sort of come out of that experience with those things bearing fruit, then that's something that you'd want to avoid, I think, in your practice. And I think, I don't know, for me, the way that I kind of try to engage with artists is to understand what they want to do and to incorporate their ideas into my sort of methodologies. So I see myself very much as artist-led, and so I have a responsibility to the artists, but I'm also bringing their work to audiences, and so I have a responsibility to those audiences as well. At the moment I'm dealing with work that is quite traumatic, and is traumatic for the artists producing it, and there's trauma associated with viewing that work as well. And so those kinds of real world impacts that you can have on people with art are things to take sort of very seriously when you're thinking of putting those ideas into the public domain. So I do take those sort of responsibilities quite seriously and try to sort of build an ethical framework around what I'm doing. What I'm seeing a lot of at the moment is artists who are curators and event makers, sort of moving out of the city and making things happen in different kinds of rural spaces that actually have a very close-knit community, and that's when sort of community actually has a very strong and identifiable group of people attached to it. And they're making work that then definitely connects to those communities. In the work that I'm doing at the moment, I'm having a connection to a very general public, I hope, and also to people who are associated with medical patient communities in New South Wales. So in some projects there will be a definite sort of connection back to community, and especially if you're working site specifically, you need to get into that community in order to make the work happen, rather than sort of helicoptering in a project and letting that sort of land in space. So if you are intending to work, as I have, in site-specific practice, and that is kind of a really important aspect to bring into what you're doing, is to make sure that you're open to discourse with the people around you, because often that will very directly impact upon the success of an event or of a project that you want to do. So I don't think that there's anything particularly singular about curatorial practice. I remember when I started working as a curator, it was just a typo in spell check. You know, nobody was actually studying to be curators, whereas now I'm teaching a bunch of people that want to be working as curators and cultural leaders in this kind of way. And so I think that landscape has totally transformed over the last 10 years, hugely in Australia. Whereas I think the practices in other places are much more established around, you know, tradition, and curatorial methodologies might expand out of those traditional foundational kind of structures of curating. I think it really depends on what you're doing. So if you want to be fleet of foot and make work right in the now with the sense of urgency, then I think you can make things happen fairly quickly. I think if you're going to sort of engage with funding bodies with your work, you need to think 3 years in advance of a major project if you want to do it. And I think this is just the landscape that we operate within. And that also depends upon what you're bringing into being as well. So if you're working with complicated arts and science collaborations, as I am, you can't expect the thing to happen in 6 months' time. It's a long form engagement. It'll take a long time for those works to be realised. Whereas if I think that if you are working towards something that has a very urgent kind of sense of what it needs to be about, then you can probably assemble people and resources in a fast way to be responsive to that particular issue. So yes, I think time is very crucial to curatorial practice, and I'm profoundly respectful of people that spend 30 years looking at a particular, painting. But my practice tends to sort of take on a faster turnaround of projects, or has done in the past. At the moment, I'm looking at something over a 3-year period, and that's very slow for me. So at the moment, I'm working on an exhibition called The Patient. This exhibition considers the experience of medical patients as artists, and the medical patient as a subject of recent contemporary art. So I'm working quite closely with 4 artists who are Australian-based, and then actually looking at the historical lineage of this work, where it's come from in terms of the body-based art practices from the 70s to the 90s, as well as disciplines that very much intersect with scientific inquiry. And I'm bringing together 12 artists for this exhibition. Some of them have passed of the illnesses that they were suffering from, and the artists that I'm working with now are engaging very closely with biomedical science to try to understand in a deeper way the experiences that they are having, and to sort of transform those experiences for audiences. So I actually started my life my career as an artist, but at the very same time as I was emerging into that field, I started an artist-run space with a bunch of other artists, and definitely started becoming wrapped up in trying to create discourse around the things that my peers were doing. And so I started to write. And so writing has always been very fundamental to my practice as a curator. In fact, I don't feel like I've done the work on a project unless I've actually published about it. So that's always been very close to me. I always feel like there's something missing if that part of working on a project hasn't manifest. So yes, I think it's definitely sort of arrived out of this interest in the work of other artists from that perspective of being an artist myself. And so I try to be very mindful of the situations in which artists practice. So for me, I've been working with small organisations for the last 15 plus years, but I'm now working independently and being reminded very profoundly of the difficulties in which artists operate and have to make their careers grow. And so I think a fundamental concern to my curatorial practice is to remember that and to be generous with artists that I'm working with. And I think it's something that we need to remind ourselves, for those of us who are waged within this culture, that we are dealing with people who have very precarious existences, and that, you know, our demands, while they need to be met, also need to be reconciled with the needs of the artist as well. So I think that's something that I try to bring into what I do, is a very sort of strong ethical sense of where I sit in that power relationship.